Hello, this is Mr. Coates, and this is APES lecture number 20, Deforestation and Sustaining Forests. This is obviously a picture of Brazil. This is I got from Google Earth, and it shows you some of the areas in the Brazilian rainforest that are really being impacted greatly by deforestation. You can kind of see these light shaded areas that are in this region. These are all areas where forest has been removed. And if you notice, you'll have these little strings that follow the rivers up that show areas that are missing forests. And usually there's a bunch of roads in these areas as well. Roads are one of the first things that happens when deforestation occurs. And the building of a road usually is bad news for a forest. You also have some very large areas up here in the middle of nowhere. There's a large area here that has no forest, and then a very large area up here that has no forest. And these areas are slowly creeping, well, not slowly, but fairly rapidly actually creeping this direction into the deeper part of the Amazon. So what are some of the causes of deforestation? The first is population growth. Obviously, with more people, you have to have more fuel wood, you have to have more lumber to build structures, you have more land to grow food. And so a lot of the forest land is destroyed for those reasons. Also, poverty. A lot of people are poor in these areas. They need some kind of income. Forestry is a job that provides them income, and then the farming afterward also provides them income. And so these things drive deforestation. Also, the use for fuel wood. In the United States, we don't use a whole lot of wood anymore for fuel sources, but in a lot of these developing countries, wood is the only source of fuel. Now, some other reasons that get closer to home here: government subsidies. When we pay forest people to take down trees on public lands, we basically lower timber prices. And this encourages more cutting because those timber companies want to make more money. Also, it's kind of strange that we are paying private companies to tear down our own forests. Should be the other way around, because they're the ones making the profit, not the U.S. government. And so government subsidies are a huge problem here in the United States, and until our government changes drastically, I don't see that going anywhere. Cattle ranching, I mentioned this is a problem in a lot of developing countries. It's also a problem here in the States. We have a lot of cattle ranchers in the areas out west that have a lot of forest, and they would tear down the forest, sell the lumber, and then continue cattle ranching in that area rather than replanting. And then ghost ranching. This is very insidious actually, and this happens in the United States all the time. So they use government cattle subsidies to buy the land for very cheap prices. And then what they'll do is that they'll harvest all the lumber on it and make a huge profit on selling the lumber, and then ranch their cattle at the same time. And so it's very, very profitable for the people who do this. Unfortunately, it's not very good for our public lands, and it's kind of an example of tragedy of the commons. And like I said earlier, a road is the biggest issue. Whenever you build a road through the forest, you allow people and vehicles to get into that forest, and as soon as you allow people and vehicles to get into a public forest, somebody wants to start cutting down the logs. And so roads usually are the first harbinger of doom, if you want to say that, for a forest. Mentioned Brazil earlier in the beginning, and there are other tropical forests throughout the world that are endangered. Indonesia is one place. But in all these tropical areas, a lot of these forest areas are cleared not only for the hardwood, but also for the fact that they're going to put up cash crop plantations, things like coconuts, coca, bananas, tea, coffee. All these tropical plants need a lot of land to grow on, and they actually make a lot more money than the forest does for the people who own it. Also, when we cut down the forest, we leave these small fragments of green space all over the place. And so that leads to habitat fragmentation, and the larger animals that needed a bigger place no longer have that bigger place in order to live because of habitat fragmentation. This also lends itself to easy mineral acquisition and oil drilling. Also, gold acquisition is a problem in a lot of these developing countries. A lot of these forest areas are over these deposits, and people are clamoring to get to them, so the forest then comes down. This is an interesting statistic down here. I got this off the internet from a group called Amazon.org. In September 2014, in 1 month, an area the size of New York City was cut down. And if you've ever been to New York City, Manhattan is a pretty big place. Now, how can we sustain forests? One of the best things we can do is that we can start getting people to understand the real cost of trees. What do they provide? Look at the economic value of the ecologic service. What does the tree provide when it's still alive? It provides habitat. It provides oxygen. It provides uptake of CO2. So if you look at all this stuff in here and what it does, and you put a dollar value on it, for example, the worth of the oxygen for a single tree, and this is done by the University of Calcutta. Obviously, it's not a local study, but it's very similar probably. You get the worth of oxygen. So if you were to take the amount of oxygen one tree produces in a lifetime, you would get $31,000 worth of oxygen. Then you take up all that other stuff that that tree provides, and you get $193,000, almost $200,000 is the cost of a tree. Unfortunately, we don't look at those ecological services when we take down trees. And unfortunately, that makes taking down a tree a lot easier. We can also protect the forest at a rate that allows them to be harvested sustainably. Remember, forests are renewable, and if you harvest them sustainably, there shouldn't be a net loss of forest. So if the foresters are required to plant when they're done logging, then that helps that. So you need to have a balance here, and that's sustainability, of course. We also need to identify those particular forests that are threatened by specific economic development. Usually whenever you throw money into the mix, money is the winner. So if you can find those forests and get those protected somehow before the economic value is seen, that's maybe underneath the forest, then that's a good way to protect those forests. Instead of clear cutting, use selective tree cutting. Recycling paper. A lot of forests are cut down just for paper. And if we were to recycle all of our paper, a lot less forest would be cut down. So that would be one. Rotation techniques. Don't harvest a forest for another 100 years after you've cut it. Minimize the impact of road building and logging. Minimize habitat fragmentation. I talked about this in the Amazon there. Leave snags for habitat. So instead of removing old dead trees that aren't very good for logging, leave those for habitat. A lot of organisms like dead trees. And then include the recreational and ecological services in the forest value. So how can we reduce the amount of wood that we waste? Reduce construction waste. If you ever go to a construction site where they're building a house, they always have a dumpster full of wood that is just being thrown away. If this wood could be reused for some other project somewhere else, that would reduce the waste. Use laminate boards instead of full wood. A lot of the timbers now you can buy are laminated, so they use pulp wood instead. And that's a great way to really reduce waste. Buy things with less packaging. That's one that you really need to look out for nowadays. A lot of these electronic devices you buy come with a lot of packaging, so you need to make a smart buying choice there. Reduce junk mail. Oh my gosh, the junk mail. I get hundreds and hundreds of pieces of junk mail a month, and it all goes back into the recycling bin. And I've tried to contact these companies to try and get them to stop sending me stuff, and it just doesn't work. But if we could reduce the junk mail somehow in this country, that would be great. More recycling, I mentioned that before. Use other types of products. Rice straw paper in China, bamboo in flooring, and kenaf, grass paper. And kenaf is a very fast growing grass just like bamboo, and it makes very good pulp for paper making. So use this instead of forest for paper. So these are all good ways to reduce our wood waste. In tropical countries, we can educate indigenous people on how to practice small-scale sustainable forestry. We can extract natural resources in a more sustainable way. For example, mining under the forest and leaving the forest intact, so using shaft mine instead of strip mine. Could also harvest, as I said before, the fruits and nuts from tropical forest and sell those as food. And then also medicines. A lot of these tropical forests have plants that have a lot of medicinal properties that we don't even know about yet, and we're just starting to learn about. And these medicines could be important in the future. So these drug companies could take some of their money that they're making millions on and buy forest up and do research on that forest, on some of those plants. All right, so there is some good news in forestry. It's not all bad. One of the good things I mentioned earlier is that most of the old growth forests that were cut down have grown back into secondary forests. And so we no longer have large tracts of land in the United States that once used to be forest and are now plains. We've grown all our forests back. Also in the United States, more wood is grown every year than harvested. So we're actually in a plus category here when it comes to producing wood in this country. Also, we're increasingly moving towards sustainable alternatives like bamboo. You're seeing more and more bamboo flooring in the world of home improvement and construction. And this is a much stronger floor. Remember, bamboo is a grass. It grows really, really fast, and so it's a very good sustainable alternative to wood. And then I mentioned Kenaf paper earlier. The other thing that we're starting to see is that some logging companies are going back to some of the older practices. Instead of using heavy machinery to drag logs out of a forest, especially those that they're doing selective cutting in, they're using draft animals like mules, and this reduces soil compaction. So they're preserving the soils as well in these forest areas. Well, if you have any questions about this lecture, please feel free to bring them into class.